Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you very much for joining our webinar of Microsoft 365 implementation, where we're going to be going through our roadmap and some best practices. My name's Lisa Treasure, Head of Marketing here at Chorus. Just before we get started, I wanted to go through a little bit of housekeeping with you all. So this webinar will be recorded and a copy of the slides and recording will be sent to everyone that has registered. We've also got a Q&A chat box which is available, so we're taking questions and we'll be answering these all at the end of the session. That's just in the top right hand corner. So just to give you a bit of an agenda of what we're going to be going through, so I'm just doing a quick introduction. We're then going to be going into a high-level Microsoft 365 roadmap and then breaking this down into phased implementation stages. At the end, we're also briefly going to touch on ongoing management. As I mentioned, there'll be some time for Q&A at the end. So this talk's going to be about 30 minutes and then we've got about 13 minutes for Q&A, so do get your questions in as we go along. Just before we get started, just to give you a really brief introduction to Chorus if you don't know who we are. So we are an IT and cybersecurity provider. So we specialise in Microsoft's three major clouds, which is Azure, Microsoft 365 and Dynamics 365. We are based in Bristol in the UK and all of our services are delivered out by our 24/7 IT service desk and cybersecurity operations centre. So I will hand you over to our two excellent speakers. We have got Jason Lee and Joe Cato, who are both solution architects here at Chorus. So Joe is going to be mainly covering the kind of productivity and security elements of Microsoft 365. Meanwhile, Jason's going to be much more focused on the compliance and data protection side of things. So over to you, Joe.
Cool. Thanks, Lisa. So thanks everyone for joining. I'd like to start off really with a bit of making sure everyone's on the same page and make sure everyone understands what Microsoft 365 is. So we're pretty confident that everyone on the call is familiar with what Office 365 is. So it's a productivity platform from Microsoft and gives you workloads such as Exchange Online, SharePoint Online, and others. Microsoft 365 is a combination of Office 365, Windows 10/11 licensing, and Microsoft's Enterprise Mobility and Security, or EMS, suite. EMS offers you security, compliance, and device management capabilities, which generally come from Azure AD, so Azure Active Directory, Plan 1, Microsoft Intune, and some other features. Microsoft 365 is a great product offering from Microsoft, and it's a fantastic tool to let you achieve more securely and from anywhere, but it is just a product. And simply purchasing the product doesn't mean you're getting the most out of it. Some of the common questions we have with customers is they've been recommended to purchase Microsoft 365 and they have done so, but they don't really know what it offers. They don't understand the security compliance features that it can bring in addition to the already known productivity features. And then once they do understand, it's then a bit of a question of where do I start? Lastly, the cost of Microsoft 365 has recently increased due to the new commerce experience, or NCE, meaning there's an increased requirement to achieve value for money. So our approach to a Microsoft 365 transition is split into the three phases that you can see here. Customers transition from fundamental to optimal over time, and in doing so, they increase the security, productivity, and compliance capabilities of their organization. It all starts off with proof of concepts. Proof of concepts are great because they allow you to test, provide feedback on features at a small scale, and don't represent a significant cost to deliver. This all reduces the risk and avoids a big bang approach. Phase 2 is then a mixture of organization-wide migrations of the items that were successfully demonstrated in the proof of concepts in phase 1, and also proof of concepts of more advanced security compliance features. Finally, phase 3 is then a rollout of the more advanced security compliance features that were proof of concept in phase 2. So some of you in attendance also attend our recent webinar on Zero Trust and Security. For those that did attend, this slide will be familiar. For those that haven't, we recommend that you do attend that webinar. But what this slide does is it, at a high level, outlines our suggested roadmap. A lot of the more advanced features at the top of the roadmap rely on more foundational aspects. And a good example of this is the compliance items. It's quite difficult to implement Office 365 DLP, which stands for Data Loss Prevention, if the data is not located in a Microsoft 365 workload such as SharePoint, Teams, Exchange.
So I guess it's really about bringing all of your content under that Microsoft 365 umbrella so you can manage it and protect it in a consistent way.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So here we've applied our 3 recommended phases to the roadmap, and as we go through each phase, we'll refer back to this slide as a sort of a reference point. Fundamental level is proof of concepts of migrating the data to Microsoft 365 and also ensuring that the workloads and the identities are protected from day one with items such as MFA, which is multi-factor authentication, conditional access, and also defining a starter and leaver process with governance wrapped around it.
Getting those leaver processes nailed down, it's definitely something you want to do early on. So once you've got users managing content in OneDrive for Business and you've got them creating their own teams or SharePoint sites, you need a plan for what's going to happen to that content and those spaces if those users move on.
Yeah. So as mentioned, the goal in this phase is proof of concepts of all of the features that you can see on screen. And these proof of concepts will give you the knowledge that the feature is suitable and also trust that the migration or deployment process works. And this is where most organizations currently are. As Mark Jones mentioned in the security and zero trust webinar, identity is the new security perimeter. And so it's crucial that as you start to move to Microsoft 365 or any cloud workload, that your identities are secured appropriately, and therefore having that foundational level of security, which for most organizations still isn't in place, is a vital first step, followed by proof of concept. So I'll quickly go through what you might be currently achieving and how they map to these Microsoft 365 workloads. So email, you could be achieving that at the moment using either on-premises Exchange servers that you or an IT provider manage. You could be using a hosted Exchange system, so a hosted by a provider, or even something such as Google Workspace, another SaaS alternative. The natural migration path here is Exchange Online. Next bit is user data, and what we mean by that is data that's worked on by a single individual and either doesn't need to be shared with a wider team or is not yet ready to be shared with a wider team. It's generally stored on the desktop or documents folders, which are usually redirected to a file server or stored on a home drive that's only available in the office or when you're connected to a VPN. And so the recommendation here is, as you can see, is OneDrive for Business because it provides you items such as 1 terabyte of storage per user, built-in versioning control, and also access from any device. Shared data, which is data that in the inverse of user data is data that is worked on by multiple individuals or is potentially a central repository of data for a team or a department, is also achieved using a file server. This could be things like departmental network drives like an S drive or an I drive, something like that. And so the migration path here is moving that content to SharePoint Online and or Teams. The Office applications, so things like Word, Excel, Outlook, are potentially an older version of Office, so something like Office 2010, or they might just be a bit of a mixed bag and not very consistent across the organization. Microsoft 365 gives you the Microsoft 365 versions of those apps, which are constantly updated by Microsoft with new features. And when Microsoft develop new features within the platform, they will test it and assume that it's accessed from something like the Microsoft 365 apps. And therefore, it's crucial that getting this rolled out as a POC initially is put in place as soon as you can. There's also little to no real-time collaboration capabilities, or you might be using something like Cisco WebEx or Zoom. Teams, Microsoft Teams gives you great collaboration experiences, such as this webinar, and is included in most of the Microsoft 365 licenses. So as I hinted initially, identity protection is key, and as you start to do these proof of concepts, whichever workload you choose first, you should look to include identity protection as part of that. So that can be MFA, so multi-factor authentication. You might not have that in place, or if you do, it might not be uniform. It might only be for IT administrators for certain systems, for example, but not used for everyone across the business. Conditional access can enforce that through Azure AD, and therefore we should do that as soon as you can. In terms of your on-premises servers, a lot of the time you have an identity platform in the form of Active Directory. and that is likely something that just runs on your domain controllers and sort of that's it. You don't have any visibility on any threats, and so that's where Microsoft Defender for Identity comes in. The way it works is you install sensors on each domain controller, and that then gives you indicators of malicious or dangerous behavior, which can then be raised for investigation by either your internal security team or security operations center or an outsourced security operations center. And then lastly, you might already have endpoint protection in place, or you might not. You could be using a third-party vendor such as Sophos. Microsoft 365 comes with Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. Even the business plan now includes it. It's highly recommended. It gives you a number of advanced features on top of standard Defender, which I won't go into because we could probably do a webinar just on that in itself. But it integrates really nicely with the rest of the Microsoft 365 Defender suite and also with Microsoft Sentinel.
So it's good to see Exchange Online right at the top of that list. Getting your email into Exchange Online, that's got to be job number one.
Yes, yeah, definitely. So I'll steal something that Satya Nadella once said, which is Exchange Online is the gateway drug to the cloud. And he was bang on. It's Exchange Online, Exchange in general, is generally something that has quite high maintenance on premises, and lots of IT teams have an inherent desire to not have to be responsible for that. And at the same time, it's quite a seamless experience to the end user in terms of what happens to them when they get migrated. But yeah, all of the workloads in Microsoft 365 depend on, in most cases, having email in place followed by user data and shared data.
Certainly make life far less painful. And from the content perspective, the top three are really your holy trinity of Microsoft 365. Pretty much everything content related in M365 hangs off Exchange, OneDrive and SharePoint in some combination.
Yeah, exactly. Cool. Okay, so we'll now move on to the advanced phase, which comprises of org-wide migrations of the items that were recently proof of concepted, followed by security and productivity items. And lastly, it also includes some compliance features, such as using Microsoft Information Protection to apply classification labels to sites and teams. So we're starting to reduce on-premises workloads by utilizing the equivalent cloud workload in Microsoft 365. Org-wide migrations of those fundamental workloads are in progress, and we're beginning proof of concepts of more advanced items. So some key callouts being Intune, and Intune has two flavors, so to say, which are MAM and MDM. So MAM is mobile application management, and MDM is mobile device management. And the key differentiator between the two is device ownership. MAM is used when the device is not owned by the organization, so it's owned by the employee. It's likely just a personal device that they also use for work. And the benefits it gives you there in comparison to MDM is you don't take full control of the device, so it's much less of a privacy gray area. With MDM, you have full control of the device. You can wipe it, you can remotely locate it, you can do most things to it, but you don't want to be able to do that on a personal device. No one wants to have that conversation with someone where an IT admin has accidentally wiped someone's phone. Turns out it's their personal phone. They've lost all of their wedding pictures. So MAM sort of fills that gap. In addition, MAM, it allows you to apply a couple of sort of compliance requirements on top of it, one of them being Cyber Essentials. So Cyber Essentials requires you to, for any device that accesses organizational data, to be on a secure operating system. And the way they define that is to be on an operating system version that is not subject to any known vulnerabilities. And in MAM, you can apply conditional launch settings to say if they're not on the latest version of iOS or Android, then it will restrict access. It won't actually allow them access to the data. And in addition, it also meets the data loss prevention side of things to an extent, in that it doesn't allow you to save data outside of the managed applications. And so an example of that would be if you were to go to the SharePoint app and then go to a SharePoint site, go to a finance site and try and download a financial report, it wouldn't let you. It wouldn't let you save it to the device. It would let you save it to your OneDrive, because obviously OneDrive is also managed by MAM, but it wouldn't let you take it out to either the device, to Dropbox, to anything else that's not managed. MDM, on the other side, is useful for company-owned devices. It's commonly used for laptops and also mobile phones if you're issued a work phone. And the intention of MDM is to fully control it. It's a work device. All you can do on it is work things. And so you get some additional controls on top of that. Another key call out is Windows Autopilot, which works with Intune MDM. Most organizations, the way they're currently achieving device provisioning is purchase a device, it gets sent to head office where IT is located. IT get the device, they unbox it, they connect it to a build server. That build server pushes an image onto the device, and then once that's done, they then box it back up and send it out, which is fine, but it doesn't really work that well during COVID, and also doesn't work post-COVID. Lots of people are working from home either primarily or for the majority of their time, and therefore you need a way of providing a device to a user that you don't have to have IT touch, and that's where Autopilot comes in. So you can purchase a device from a manufacturer, so Dell, HP, so on and so forth, have it sent directly to the user. The user unbox it, they get to put off the little sticky label, which everyone enjoys, and they sign in. And then once they sign in, the device transforms. So within about 20 minutes or so, it transforms from just being a bog standard Windows device to a device that's managed. It has all of your applications on it. So it has Office applications on it. It has Edge. It has anything else you might need. But it also has device configuration profiles in place. So things like BitLocker to ensure the device is encrypted is in place. And then finally, you can apply compliance policies, and compliance policies check the device health. An example being to mark a device as compliant or non-compliant if it has BitLocker encryption or not. And what you can then do when you have the device managed and in Intune and ability to assign compliance policies is you can then look to grant or deny access to Microsoft 365 and therefore your data if the device is or isn't compliant. So if it's not compliant, you can say you don't have access to data. You don't meet our organization's requirements, and therefore you can't access it. Lastly, with things like MDM, you can wipe the device. So if someone loses their laptop, you can wipe it, and then next time it connects to any internet connection, no dependency for connecting to your VPN, it will get wiped, which is a real key benefit. You've also got, sorry, go on, Jason.
So I was just going to say, I've spotted passwordless in the bottom right there. We know that a lot of organizations struggle or have a headache with password management. Can you tell us about that?
Yes. So passwords are the bane of most people's existence, to be honest. You and I hate having to remember them, and the IT service desk teams hate having to go through the reset process. So passwordless meets the goal. So passwords, as we know, are a terrible security feature now. They're very easy to breach, and in most cases, because there's so many different services that each individual uses, they use the same password, and so you have one security breach which you hear about almost every week, and then you've got the password to everything else. So passwordless is the goal. It's in this phase because it is more of an advanced item, but there's a couple of different ways of achieving it. So you've got the Microsoft Authenticator app, which is also used for MFA. And the way that works is you go to sign into Microsoft 365, you type in your email address, and usually when you press next, you get asked your password. But instead what happens is what you see on your screen is a number. And then you get a notification on your phone, you open up the Authenticator app and you see 3 numbers, and you have to tap the matching number. As soon as you do that, the phone will perform biometric authentication, so Face ID or Touch ID, or even a PIN if you've not got that capability. And as long as you match the numbers up correctly, you'll be signed in. No need for a password. Another option, depending on the device, is Windows Hello for Business. So Windows Hello for Business allows you to use, in the same way as a mobile device, biometrics. So you can use facial recognition, fingerprint to sign in. And the main benefits of that is it's very difficult to fake a fingerprint, and so you know that if you do lose a device, and you for some reason it's not online before it receives the wipe command from Intune, you know that person that's got the device is going to find it even more difficult to get on and access any offline data because they don't have that person's face or fingerprint.
So we can also see some of the Microsoft compliance tools coming in here. And really what this is all about is it's starting to differentiate between how you manage different types of content. So for example, we've got Microsoft Information Protection, MIP, site and team classification. So the idea here is you've got your business users, they create a SharePoint site, a Microsoft team. The very first question they're asked is, what's the sensitivity? And they're basically choosing from anywhere usually between 2 and 4 sensitivity levels that you've chosen, you've configured. And that will basically apply commensurate protections to that site or team. So if my user chooses a low sensitivity, we might allow them to add guest users to the team. We might allow them to access it from any device or from any location. If on the other hand they've marked that team as highly confidential, we're probably going to lock down external sharing. We might restrict access to corporate managed devices. So just not my mute button on, using Intune as Joe mentioned. We might also lock it down to specific IP ranges, to specific locations. Same idea for file and email protection at a basic level. You're having your users classify files and emails, and we're putting appropriate protections and restrictions in place based on that classification. So whether it's marking, whether it's headers and footers, whether it's encryption, whether we're preventing people printing or forwarding, those kind of controls are there available to leverage. Guest access reviews is probably another one that's well worth calling out. So being able to invite external users into SharePoint sites, into teams to collaborate, fantastic capability. But one of the risks that comes along with that is those guest accounts sticking around for longer than planned. So it's very easy to invite someone into a SharePoint site, forget they're there, and then you've got what we call an aged guest account, giving it's like a gateway, a backdoor into your environment. So access reviews, we set them up so that every month or every 3 months, the team owner or the site owner runs through a review process, and they basically review the continuing access for all of their guest users. Does this person still need access to this data? Yes or no? And it just means we keep a lid on that guest access.
Perfect. Thanks, Jason. So now we're starting to move on to the optimal stage. So at this point, the advanced phase is complete and you're considerably ahead of most organizations in terms of their technical maturity. As you can see, this phase is very heavy on the compliance platform with some items that may or may not be suitable for every organization. Example, that would be Azure AD Application Proxy or Azure Virtual Desktop. But as you near the top of this roadmap, your attention should start to turn from the migration and deployment aspect to ongoing management and how you achieve that and how you use the vast amount of security and compliance data that's now coming in. So advanced security and productivity features are being demonstrated or rolled out as part of this phase, and some key callouts from this are device risk. So this comes from Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, and what this does is it can integrate with Intune compliance policies. So if the device is over a certain risk level, maybe it's subject to a number of vulnerabilities. Maybe there was a recent 0-day which came out and that's knocked it from a medium to a high threat level, then that will trigger the change of compliance state, and it will mark the device as non-compliant. And then the same process will apply, which is it will prevent that device from accessing your Microsoft 365 data. The user will then likely phone up the service desk, and the service desk can remediate and get the device healthy before it's granted access to data again. You can also start to automate some business processes using either Power Apps or Power Automate, and also considering or maybe even testing Azure Virtual Desktop or Windows 365 as a virtual desktop solution for maybe seasonal or temporary workers, so people over Christmas or maybe even contractors. You can also start to use Microsoft Sentinel with your in-house or outsourced cybersecurity operations center to provide you with the detection and response capabilities that you've now got.
So you can see that Microsoft compliance or Microsoft 365 compliance is very heavily represented at this stage. And that's really because the compliance tools build on your technical maturity in other areas. So if we start with Office 365 DLP, or data loss prevention. So this is about creating policies that detect when sensitive or confidential information is being shared in an inappropriate way. And in many cases, that's going to be, when you're sharing confidential information with a guest user, someone outside the organization. But it could equally be, if you have Chinese walls, information barriers within your organization that prohibit certain types of sharing between departments. The information in question, it could be financial, it could be personally identifiable information, it could be health data, or it might be confidential data that's specific to your organization. So I think DLP is probably a fairly well-known product class, but the big advantage of Office 365 DLP is that it's tightly integrated with your productivity applications. So rather than just focusing on email, it doesn't matter whether you're sharing data directly from SharePoint, from OneDrive, or by email, you've got the same policies, the same set of controls available to you. And you can take various actions in response to policy hits. So you can warn users with policy tips, say, hey, it looks like you're about to do something that you probably shouldn't, or step things right up to blocking the action altogether. So why have we got it under optimal rather than earlier on the roadmap? It's a couple of reasons, really. First, it's because to use it effectively, you've really got to have a solid understanding of what kind of challenges you're facing. So what kind of content are you storing? What are the data risks around that content? What are your regulatory obligations? And the other main reason is you can't just turn on DLP. You need to roll it out with a degree of caution. There's usually some horror stories out there about people who switch on DLP, stop the managing director from sending an email and have to backtrack fairly swiftly. So it's one of those things, you manage it, you roll it out cautiously, you roll it out in test mode, you monitor it, you tune it, you try and reduce your false positive count, and you continuously improve what it's doing for you. Endpoint DLP takes it a step further. That's about extending that protection to your Windows 10 or Windows 11 managed devices. So we have policies that can prevent users from, say, copying a sensitive file from their desktop to a portable drive, or stop them uploading it to Google Drive or Dropbox, and those kind of controls. So there's another dependency there, because for that to work, those devices have to be known to Azure AD. So they have to be hybrid joined or Azure AD joined in order for that to work. Platforms like Insider Risk Management build on these core capabilities, build on DLP, but really take things to the next level. So, for example, Insider Risk Management can connect to your HR platform. And the usual example scenario is someone's handed in their notice, they're working their notice period, all of a sudden they're downloading large numbers of files from SharePoint. Those two things in isolation might not necessarily be a concern, but together they're an indication that you've got a potential loss of intellectual property, and it's something that you might want to look into. So really powerful set of capabilities there. On the MIP side of things, at this level, it's about moving from purely manual classification to automated classification. So rather than having your users manually label and classify every email they send, every file they touch, we have these policies, trainable classifiers working in the background. So trawling your SharePoint sites, trawling your OneDrives, looking for content that matches particular criteria, and labeling them automatically in the background. It's in this final optimal stage. Again, it's about understanding and maturity. You understand your content well enough to build those sensitive information types, to model this, to build those trainable classifiers, and also about having the capacity to actually monitor how it's working and make adjustments where necessary. It's a powerful set of tools.
Yeah, perfect. So Throughout this webinar, we've referred to quite a well-defined migration path, but it is just a recommended approach and it's in no way prescriptive. In fact, most Microsoft 365 migrations are tailored. And a common example of this may be bringing forward a certain item to align with a license renewal date, such as your endpoint protection software. It may be using, again, Sophos potentially. And it may be that the renewal date is coming up in 6 to 12 months. And so we'd bring that aspect forward and modify things as needed. But then also the roadmap assumes Microsoft 365 E5 licensing, but not every organization has that license. It is the most expensive option. And so we'll also tailor the roadmap to the license level that you have. But then once the Microsoft 365 implementation is complete, you'll be utilizing all aspects of the licensing and all the benefits that come with it. But as I mentioned before, the ongoing management is key. You need individuals or teams to manage not just the security aspects, which is usually in the form of a CSOC, but also to keep on top of the ever-evolving nature of Microsoft 365 to see what new innovations are on the horizon and how they might impact you. And then lastly, Jason, there's a need to keep on top of the data protection and compliance needs as well, isn't there?
Yeah, definitely. So the type of data you work with is going to evolve. The type of sectors you're working in might also change. The regulatory frameworks you work within are probably also evolving. And the capabilities of the platform itself are evolving constantly as well. So you need to be monitoring. DLP is a good example. Really, you need to be monitoring those policies, making sure it's still fit for purpose, making sure the false positive rate isn't deteriorating, and really keeping everything on track, making sure it's still doing the best it can for you.
Yeah, perfect. So here we've included some links to some additional resources. So the Microsoft documentation is very good. Microsoft used to use a platform called TechNet, which wasn't the most easiest to navigate. The new Docs platform is very easy to navigate, and it's constantly kept up to date by Microsoft. So we'd recommend going there as your initial launching pad. We've also got a link to our resources, so previous webinars such as the Zero Trust and Security webinar that I mentioned, and some other items. And last but not least, a personal favorite of mine and Jason's, which is the Microsoft 365 licensing map, m365maps.com. It's a great place. It's maintained by a Microsoft employee. It's something. It's like his personal project. It's not a Microsoft official item, but it gives you a great way to look at each license, E3, E5, Business Premium, and see what's in it, and also to compare. So you could compare, for example, E3 to E5 and see what the differences are.
It's a fantastic website.
Amazing, thanks Joe and Jason. So I'm just going to hand over now to Q&A. So just going to check to see what questions we've got coming. Also, please feel free to add any further questions. So first question that I've just got here is, this one's around MFA. So what are the common blockers when implementing MFA? Probably one for you, Joe.
Yep. So it's a good question. It's quite a common theme. In most cases, it's a mixture of user communication and just setting the expectation, really. So a lot of the time, our recommended authentication option for MFA is the Microsoft Authenticator app. It gives you that approval process. You can just approve a notification, or for passwordless, you can just tap the number that matches. But it does involve installing an application on a phone, and some individuals are reluctant to do that. Maybe they don't know what that app means they can do. They might think that maybe they're doing MDM. Maybe IT can fully manage the device, and obviously that's not intended. And so user communication in most cases is one way to get rid of the majority of blockers, but also there are some natural blockers just due to environment. An example could be in certain manufacturing or hospitality, staff might not be allowed to have a phone on them. And so it's difficult to then use the phone as an MFA option. And so we've got some other options there. So one of them being a keyring sized token, similar to what you would use when online banking first started becoming a thing, where you tap the button on it, it shows you a code, which can be used for MFA, or using more modern things such as a YubiKey, which is a hardware key that can be used with Windows Hello. So you plug it into the device, tap the button on on the USB key, and that signs you in using Windows Hello. So those are sort of the main ways around it.
Thanks, Joe. I've got one here about MIP, so that's Microsoft Information Protection. Are there standard labels that can be applied?
No, you wouldn't want that really. So it should be specific to every organisation. Ideally, the labels that you create are going to be driven by your information classification policy. So ideally, there's a policy there that comes from the business, not from IT, that sets out, these are our information classification categories. All the information we work with fits into one of these categories, and we build the labels to reflect that. I'd say if you're starting with a complete blank slate, run some workshops. So get representatives from different areas of the business, get them together, preferably somewhere with a whiteboard, and brainstorm all the different types of content that you work with, and start thinking about the sensitivity of each of those and try and group them into buckets or categories. So ideally you want to come up with probably between 3 or 5 top level categories. Microsoft recommend a total of 5, a maximum of 5 top level categories, and build it up that way. So it doesn't matter what you call your labels, name them after favorite colors, favorite zoo animals, if that makes sense to your organization. But in most cases, it's going to be general, confidential, highly confidential, but it very much needs to be driven by the business, by the types of content that you work with.
Cheers, Jason. Joe, just going back to MFA, I've got a question. Can smart cards be used for Microsoft MFA?
No, is the short answer. So with Azure AD, you have 2 types of authentication. You've got managed authentication, which means the authentication is performed in the cloud. And what that means is the password is synchronized from on-premises Active Directory to Microsoft 365, and that hash of the password is compared to ensure it's correct. And Azure AD MFA uses that in most cases. The other option is federated, which basically means you offload all the authentication from Azure AD to your own federation services. A common one is ADFS, or Active Directory Federation Services. That does support using smart cards, but you can't use the 2 in combination. So if smart cards are in use, I'd suggest looking at something like a YubiKey or a FIDO2 key, which is FIDO2 USB key. YubiKey is just one of the manufacturers to achieve MFA on a physical device as the alternative option.
Thanks, Joe. This one's about licensing. What licensing level do you recommend?
Joe can definitely have the licensing question.
Who's going to jump at this one?
The answer is it depends, which is never a fun answer. But what I mean by that is it depends on the size of the company. So we've mentioned Microsoft 365 E5. So the E series of licenses, so E3, E5, are enterprise licenses. And the way Microsoft define that is more than 300 individuals within the company. Anything less than 300 falls into the business side of things, so Microsoft 365 Business Standard or Business Premium. So kind of depends. If you're less than 300 or 300 individuals, we'd recommend Business Premium. It gives you things like Defender for Endpoint, Intune. I won't go into too much detail because breach-side maps is it should be the go-to place. But at the same time, if let's say you're a 600-seat organization, and you can mix and match. So you can have 300 Business Premium and then 300 E3 licenses. So you're not tied to suddenly switching. As soon as you get that 301st employee, you've not got to suddenly switch everyone over to E3 or E5. You can mix and match. But we definitely recommend E3 with maybe the E5 security or E5 compliance add-ons as cheaper alternatives to the full E5 aspect. Or if you're less than 300 individuals, we'd recommend Business Premium.
Brilliant, thanks, Joe. I've got one here about information lifecycle management, which I think was on a slide. What do you mean by this? Probably one for you, Jason.
I'll let you have that one, Jason.
So information lifecycle management is about moving away from keeping everything forever, really. So 10 years ago, pretty much everyone's attitude was keep every piece of data you create forever. Really nowadays, every piece of information you create should have a lifetime. So it's required for a certain length of time. When it's no longer required, it should be deleted. Every piece of information you keep for longer than you need to, it's a data risk. If you were to suffer a breach, you don't want to be hanging on to data that you've no need to, or you can't justify keeping. So we've got some tools available within Microsoft 365 for managing the information lifecycle. One of them would be retention labels and retention policies. So the idea is you create a set of labels, which are kind of like tags, for different types of content. So you might have, financial content, contractual content, complaints, risk assessments, cost assessments, lots and lots of different types of content. Each one of those will have a life cycle associated with it. And by creating these retention labels and retention policies, we can take some of the manual labor out of managing that. So we label files based on their type, or we have them labeled automatically based on where you file them. And we set it up so that, say, your complaint data, 10 years after it's last modified, it's deleted automatically. You can take it even further with some of the E5 capabilities. So you can have things like event-driven retention. So, for example, if you're storing employee records, you tag each one with a label and also with an employee ID. That way, it doesn't matter where you're storing them, anywhere under that Microsoft 365 umbrella. When that employee leaves, you trigger an event. So this employee has left, and you're basically then time bombing that content wherever it sits and saying that in 3 years' time, or whatever length of time makes sense to you, that content is going to be deleted automatically. You're then avoiding the need to have to, trawl all your SharePoint sites, all your OneDrives, all your emails to try and find all the relevant content. So there's lots of powerful capabilities there for managing that information lifecycle.
Thanks, Jason. Probably just got time for just one more. So I've got what kind of tools are there to help us move things into Microsoft 365?
Well, it's a bit of both of us, I think, isn't it, Jason? So I guess I'll start off. So I'll speak about Exchange. So depends on where Exchange currently is, or where emails currently is. Most common one is Exchange on premises. And so for that, there are a couple of different migration options. Depends on the number of mailboxes to be moved. If there's more than a couple of hundred, then the recommendation would be to do Exchange Hybrid, which sort of integrates your existing Exchange with Exchange Online and allows you to move mailboxes in batches to Exchange Online. Also gives you the best user experience because all users have to do is close and reopen Outlook, and that's it. They've been moved over to Exchange Online. There's also some other options for smaller Exchange deployments, such as a minimal hybrid approach, which is intended to be done for less than 100 or 200 mailboxes, and usually done either over a weekend or over a short period of time. But then there's also you might have your mail in third-party systems, so it could be Google Workspace or it could be hosted Exchange. Microsoft don't provide tooling for that, so we'd look to leverage third-party tooling to achieve that. One solution we would use is a product called from a company called Cloudyway, and the way that works is it signs in on behalf of the user, or if it's hosted Exchange, you have to provide it with the user's password to sign in, and it then copies the data from the mailbox to the new mailbox in Exchange Online, and then there's finally a cutover period, usually over a weekend or so. Did you want to speak about the other bits, Jason? So SharePoint.
Yes, I guess on the sort of file management side, there's a whole bunch more tools. So if you're moving content from file shares or cloud platforms into OneDrive, into SharePoint, into Teams. So if you're moving content into Teams, you're actually moving it into SharePoint, but that's one for another day. Microsoft provides a bunch of free tools. They're a good place to start. So Migration Manager would be the probably the most well known. So the idea of Microsoft Migration Manager is you install agents on or near your file shares, and these are small, lightweight applications. That allows you to coordinate the entire migration from the Microsoft 365 Admin Center. So you deploy these agents in your on-premises infrastructure, wherever you want to move file share content across, and then you coordinate the whole thing from Microsoft 365. There's also Microsoft Mover. So Microsoft acquired a company called Mover a couple of years ago. The functionality is slowly being integrated into Migration Manager. But this is about tools for moving from other cloud platforms into SharePoint and OneDrive. So if you need to move from Dropbox or Box.com and Google Drive and a bunch of other supported platforms, Mover can help you do that. So again, it's another good free tool. We've got a SharePoint migration tool. So if you're moving from legacy versions of SharePoint, I think going back to SharePoint 2010, you can use SharePoint migration tool, SPMT, to help bring that content across. And the advantage of all these tools is they will all preserve metadata, so timestamps, last modified dates, last modified by who created the file and that kind of thing. When your requirements get more sophisticated, if you're looking to map metadata and that kind of thing, we leverage paid for platforms, things like ShareGate, for more complex challenges. So there's a whole range of tools.
Thanks, guys. That's it for questions. So thanks everyone for joining us. As I mentioned at the start, we'll be sending a copy of the recording and the slides to everyone that's registered. If you do have any questions, but you didn't get a chance to ask them, feel free to reply to the email and we can get them answered for you. But thank you everyone for joining.
Thanks everyone.
Thanks everyone.